All right. Well, I think we're up to 100 attendees or 81 attendees. Andrew, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ed. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's event, Future Streets, Lessons and Paths Forward from Open Streets. We've got a great program of presentations and moderated discussion to encourage thoughtful debate about the future of open streets in New York City. Before we hand things over to our event MC, Thad Pawlowski of the Columbia University Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes, I and my fellow co-hosts wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves. I'm Andrew Brown, Director of Programs at Van Allen Institute, a nonprofit based here in New York that works to create equitable cities through inclusive design by working with historically under-resourced communities to achieve justice in how cities are built.
Thanks, Andrew, and hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Sacco, Director of Partnerships at the Urban Design Forum. We are an independent membership organization debating the critical issues facing our city. Our fellows are designers, developers, public officials, and advocates working to shape a better future for all New Yorkers, and we're really excited to be co-hosting this event today.
Hi, I'm Danny Harris. I'm honored to be Executive Director at Transportation Alternatives. We've been on the forefront of fighting for a people-first city in New York for almost 50 years, and in doing so, helping to advocate for better walking, biking, and public transit. So it's an honor to be here with all of you.
Thad, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much. I'm Thad Pawlowski from the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes. We're a research group at Columbia University that focuses on environmental justice and climate justice. And I just want to start by saying, you know, we're meeting virtually today, as we have been for the last year, but otherwise, we would be gathered in Lenapehoking, the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape peoples. And I want you to join me in acknowledging the Lenape community, their traditional territory, elders, ancestors, and future generations, and in acknowledging that the city that we share was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples. The purpose of this event today is to gather lessons from this incredible last year of radically reimagining the city. What's worked, what didn't work, what's next. As you see, we're casting the net wide for this conversation. It's not wide enough. There's more people to be involved in this conversation. We think that the future of the city's streets and public spaces should involve everyone, but maybe especially those who have been historically excluded from that conversation. So we'll do what we can today to learn lessons, and we're going to have 5 rapid PechaKucha style presentations. Followed by a panel discussion, response from city officials from Department of Transportation and Department of City Planning. And I just want to say before we get started that throughout the next 1.5 hours, the Q&A will be open, and we'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts and ideas. Please be respectful of the panelists. And so we'll have 5 presentations starting right now with our first presenter. Our first presenter will be Leslie Duvall from Street Lab. And Leslie, are you all set to lead us through your 7-minute presentation? Great.
Yeah, here's my screen. I hope everybody can see it. So hi, I'm Leslie. I'm the executive director and co-founder of a nonprofit in New York called Street Lab. And Street Lab creates and shares programs for public space across the city. We're a funny little organization that has really grown over the past 10 years, filling a niche and a need, all focused on public space. We've developed a series of programs that we provide across the city, and the programs all have sort of a physical component that transforms space and creates a place to gather. So some of the examples of our programs are our reading room, a portable reading room, Read, a drawing station. We have something called Explore, which is almost like a natural history museum exhibit about urban nature, building station. You can see Crazy Lego, writing. And we work all over the city in all kinds of public spaces. Everywhere we go is by request. We don't work alone. We're there in partnership with community groups who are working hard to make public spaces welcoming and improve them and do all kinds of things for their communities. And we now provide, in a typical year, about 150 days of programming. So what happened with the pandemic, of course, like everyone, we did have to stop. But in our case, we didn't really have to change much about what we do because we don't rely on walls. So when restrictions were lifted in July, we were ready to go back out there on the street with some new programs designed from the ground up, specifically for the pandemic and for open streets, because that had just been announced. So this is just a shot of West 9th Street in Red Hook on the very day that restrictions were lifted in July of last year. And here we are setting up, this is Wei Du, who works for us, setting up our obstacle course. And here is one of the programs that we started taking around to a lot of open streets. This is in Red Hook, again in July. Here it is on 34th Avenue, open street in Queens. Last fall on Willis Avenue in the Bronx. 101st Street in East Harlem and Pleasant Avenue in East Harlem. So, you know, the challenge at that time was, of course, how to bring people together safely while keeping them apart. So some of the other programs we designed for this moment were something we call Street Marker, which really relies on these chalk tools that allows people to make collaborative murals in the street out of chalk together while staying apart. That resulted in some beautiful murals, temporary murals that got everybody working together. Here's some more shots of it. Another program we came up with very quickly was homework hubs. We heard from students and teachers and families that, you know, students were isolated but still, you know, was there a way we could allow them to meet and at least do homework together, get help, take a little bit of the pressure off their parents. So we set up in a plaza and then we started using some of the open streets again. As the weather got colder, we turned to the heated areas of dining stalls set up on streets. This is in Chelsea, West 16th Street next to Chelsea Market. And we also started using those stalls for other kinds of programs. Musician with the Chelsea Symphony. So the lessons learned are sort of the same lessons that we've learned over the years of doing this that apply to any public space. Really that programming is key. If you're working in a space where people don't already naturally gather, programming becomes even more important. This is West 9th Street, again, on that first day that we arrived to set up our obstacle course before we were there. It was closed to traffic, but you see the challenge of just convincing cars that no, actually, you got to stay out. This is in use. And, you know, I think also what happens on streets is perhaps even more of an opportunity to fulfill the promise of public space, which I think is places where we can connect, forging this compact of living together and sharing space. When we do things like a reading room on the street, and it's something that doesn't involve cars, there's more of a transformation. And it's this juxtaposition that sends more of a message. This is from back in 2013, from our first reading room that we called the Uni, right in the middle of the street. And that transformation is what Street Lab's all about. That's what we're seeking. And I hope we can find more ways to use streets for these kinds of things. As for us, you know, in terms of how we're planning for streets, I do think there's hope here now that the program is going to be here to stay, and we need to work towards more resources that support open streets. You know, we're planning to just try to continue to build our capacity to. This is just this past weekend, getting our Right program back out for the first time in public. You know, we want to take this to all the open streets as much as we can. We're trying to just build our capacity to respond as much as we can and continue experimenting. So I'm going to end there and take any questions, or leave it to you, Thad.
That's great, Leslie. If there are questions for Leslie, please put them in the Q&A, and so we'll use the Q&A to manage any additional questions for the panelists, so we can keep the presentations going. And so next up is Jim Burke from 34th Avenue Open Streets Coalition. Jim, are you all set to share screen and present?
I am all set. Okay, can you see my screen?
All good.
Okay, so I'm one of the founders, a co-founder of 34th Avenue Open Streets, but I'm just one person. We have about 150 volunteers, 40 that work any given week on closing and opening the streets, programming. And this all started right after the city did a very poor pilot program that was just 2 blocks long by our only park, by the only space that we did have, and it was very heavily policed. So what we wanted to do is activate the street. When the police were in charge of the street, no one was using it. And one of the reasons they canceled it after a very short pilot was they said, no one's using it, and not realizing how uninviting it was. So we actually took over a small street, closed it with sandwich boards, and immediately filled up with kids, and we started chalking, we started using it that day. And it was just a message to DOT and the mayor that really just some signage and a barricade is enough. You don't need a big police presence. But we also knew that you needed to invite people out to the street, because the street is, for many people, a very dangerous place. That's where people get hurt by cars, and for, unfortunately, for 20, 30 years, we've stopped playing in our streets and enjoying them. And so what we wanted to do immediately was we instituted programming, and we instituted programming pretty much 7 days a week. We did a few right off the bat, and we did Zumba and salsa and Pilates. This is a children's game, Sapo, from South America. And we also said, bring out your beach chair, come out for coffee, relax. And this year is an ESL class, every different nationality practicing English. This was potluck. We basically pulled out all the stops, and this is our family bike ride every Friday. We get 10 to 40 people, depending on the weather and the day. Just really, this is Pilates. Painting. We just really wanted to make sure that people took ownership of the streets. So that's why we had volunteers. So we also wanted to make as many people invested in our streets. So we first partnered with over a dozen community groups to help us back us in our bid to make sure that we could take over from the police to open and close the street. We don't have a wealthy bid in our area. We don't have restaurants. This is all residential. And so every single day we were out in the street in the winter, Halloween, we put cultural programs, dance programs. We also try to respond to any complaints. So people say, oh, it's a little dirtier. The whole city was dirtier, but we say, you know what? We'll do cleanups on Saturdays. We partnered with so many, this is one of our partners, Ciclistas Latinoamericanos. We said, come do your 34th Avenue bike ride on an open street and not worry about having to need a police escort. We did candlelight vigils. We did caroling. We did everything from early mornings to evening, just depending on the day. And the DOT was really wonderful and looked the other way and basically let us find what worked and what didn't. This is a big success being able to do this. And we have volunteers, cheerleaders up to 80 years old. We have a lot of teenagers that help us. And basically a lot of our programs were started, like this particular one is a races. A 13-year-old boy said, I would like to do races. And we said, okay, if you really want, come with your mom tomorrow and we'll do races. Someone else approached us and they want to practice English. And so anybody who met us on the street, we just immediately started programming with them. All they had to do was show up. And no matter what the weather, we did it all year round. We thought it was very important to make sure, just like when I grew up in the Bronx, and we used the street all year round. And we wanted to bring that same kind of freedom and safety back to our streets. And there was, later on now the permitting process, unfortunately, is very arduous. And we're hoping that DOT can make it, they've made it a little slightly easier. But in order for this to work around the city and for it to be more equitable, that we really have to make this a lot easier and let a lot more flexibility. We're right now there are certain things that are not permitted, or it's just so painfully screen after screen to do these things. And we think this to be all over the city, we really need to make a really easy ask, especially if the street, once the street is designated, it should be a couple of clicks and you get to do your programming. Now our street, is 26 blocks long, and we pushed for that. We wanted all of 34th Avenue actually, because in order for it to be meaningful, it has to be more than a block or so. It should, and our goal is for it to be a connected network so that you could travel throughout the city on your bicycle, on your skateboard, or just going for a walk without ever having to fear for your life or worry about cars. And we've been very lucky with our drivers. They've seen, then the residents themselves, they've seen that maybe it might be a second or two out of longer of their day, but we've shown, look what you can do, park your car and then come join us and learn salsa, or help a neighbor learn English, or go for a nice bike ride. And this is basically, we just try to engage as many neighbors as we could, and any complaints or any issues, we've tried to address them. And we've worked very closely with DOT and previously NYPD to make sure that everybody can enjoy our streets safely. And I can't emphasize, Leslie also emphasized this, programming is key in order to bring people out comfortably in the street. If you just simply close the street, it's not going to magically fill with people. Now that we've shown that you can do that, I saw a tap dancing class the other day. I've seen every kind of boxing class. I've seen, people have seen probably in the New York Times, seniors playing bingo. We've seen every kind of people in person come out and use the street the way that it can benefit them the most. And this pales in comparison to any park, because it's right outside your door, and it's accessible from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Moments from where you are. And a lot of our people who enjoy our street, they might be day laborers, cleaners. And so all of our programs are geared to just drop in. You don't have to sign up. It doesn't matter if you miss a class or miss this, you're always welcome. So that way we capture all of our neighborhood from all income levels. And we love 34th Avenue. We're thrilled that it's permanent. And we'd like to see this, as I said, a connected network throughout the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. And now we have a group presentation, group working on the Neighborhood Hoods Now project. We have Leslie Ramos from the 82nd Street Partnership, and Emma Silverblatt from Soil Architecture, and Shane Algier from LTL Architects. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. For the past year, our team of architects has been able to provide pro bono design services in Jackson Heights, Queens, through UDF and Van Allen's unprecedented program, Neighborhoods Now. Our work in this program was made possible by a large group of collaborators. We're very grateful for the volunteers and support we've received to date. I'm going to start off this presentation by sharing some examples of what we believed worked well for us during this project. First off, coming into a diverse, primarily immigrant community, there was a lot of initial mistrust. The outcomes of this project are indebted to the dedicated involvement of our local partner, the 82nd Street Partnership. Executive Director Leslie Ramos provided support by personally reaching out to connect us to the community. As designers, Leslie was our main client, and we were able to support her in realizing projects for the BID's constituents and beyond through her network in the area. Secondly, we found it was very important to have established a field office in the neighborhood. This allowed us to become a familiar presence among a population that is less tech-centric and primarily responsive to in-person communication. This space, donated by a landlord on Leslie's board, also functioned as our construction material storage and a message board to share services and completed work. Since last June, we have worked with 24 local businesses and attempted to aid the community in accessing many of New York City's public realm programs. We found that some projects were much easier to accomplish than others. We were most successful at helping individual businesses get permitted for open restaurants. We provided free collapsible barriers produced from recycled formwork to any restaurant that asked. We also employed a local carpenter on these jobs and hired local artists to paint them. But the greatest success we saw was realizing that by giving these businesses owners a helping hand to get started, they were in turn reaching out to their neighbors and explaining to them how to get permitted. And this chain reaction allowed many more members of the community to participate in open restaurants.
So if Emma had sort of an overview of some of our successes, my portion of the presentation will show and start to elaborate on some of the difficulties we encountered. So one of the things we love about Jackson Heights is the annual street food festival called Viva La Comida. It's led by Leslie and the 82nd Street Bid. It serves as a vital economic boost to restaurants and helps Jackson Heights become and be the destination cultural district. So the image on the right shows 12 locally owned restaurants along 82nd where Viva La Comida is held. Red indicates some restaurants which initially showed interest to us in participating in the open restaurants program. Unfortunately, 82nd Street has lost one ground floor restaurant and multiple second floor tenants during the COVID pandemic. So Jackson Heights is home to many small businesses that have narrow interiors, which make social distancing difficult. The existing streetscape has many challenges for restaurants to participate in the open restaurants program. Some of those are indicated in red on the slide. You can see the existing bike rack on the right side of the slide, which takes up 2 restaurant street frontages, and the bus stop, as well as very limited parking, makes several businesses ineligible to participate. Of the restaurants that are eligible, we encountered additional difficulties. One manhole led to a citation from Con Ed that resulted in the removal of their outdoor seating entirely. One Colombian bakery and one Latin American restaurant were not able to participate because they're licensed by the state rather than the city. And Leslie will elaborate on that point a little later. So we saw the DOT Open Streets program as an alternative to help some of the businesses that weren't able to participate in the open restaurants program. Behind our Open Streets application was a team of architects as well as traffic engineers. Unfortunately, this application was denied due to concern by the NYPD about public safety and quality of life issues. So as a design exercise, we also explored the potential for full pedestrian plaza. We've seen success in other parts of the city with the creation of pedestrian plazas. And if the Open Streets application was approved and the community adopts it as a success, the plaza could be a consideration for the community at a later date. So our experience working in Jackson Heights has exposed the pre-existing inequality that exists in New York City. If programs and policies are not designed with the marginalized communities at the center, those programs will only continue to exacerbate the existing inequality.
As we review our work over the past year, we asked ourselves how access to Open Street program could be improved. We started by trying to answer why our attempt to implement the Open Street program on 82nd Street failed when we had all the right ingredients: a nonprofit organization willing to lead, professional site planning assistant, participating restaurants, and a track record of running a single date event without any incident. Our first step was to look for Open Street around our district for comparison. Sadly, we only found one on 34th Avenue. An expanded look at Queens simply highlighted the scarcity of Open Street throughout the borough. Taking a broader look at the city, we noticed that open streets were abundant in affluent and mostly white neighborhoods. It is no doubt that the primary beneficiaries are communities with few socioeconomic problems and more resources. Given that Open Street program is being rarely used as an economic development tool in less affluent and diverse communities, the city should make a few adjustments to ensure the program is more inclusive and inviting. Here are a few of our suggestions. First, the city should take into consideration cultural practices when developing rules. For example, in Latinx community, it is customary to have multi-service food establishments. Just on one block of 82nd Street, we have a Mexican bakery / grocer / restaurant and a Colombian carniceria / grocer / restaurant. Despite both locations offering full service restaurants, the rules exclude them from participating because they're permitted through the state of New York, which license grocers. Another program improvement we would like to see is clear rules and improved communication between program managers and inspectors. On our street, one of our restaurants, Spanish-speaking restaurant, was visited by two non-Spanish-speaking DOT inspectors. Their assessment of the existing setup varied. It seems that each inspector had different interpretation of the rules, which did not match our previous conversations with DOT. After implementing the inspector's recommended changes, the restaurant was told by Con Edison to take down the setup due to assistant manhole. These are very costly changes and discourage restaurants from participating in the program. New York City has a long history of using street programming to stimulate economic and cultural activities. The Open Street program was started with that same premise. We know that the program can be a tool to restart the city's economy and help businesses overcome economic crisis. For example, during our festival, Viva la Comida, participating restaurant revenues increased between 30 to 80%. New restaurants that participate in the festival tend to stay open past the 1-year mark, while those that do not participate usually shut down before the 1-year anniversary. In conclusion, to foster equitable recovery and prevent working poor families from going into further poverty during economic and natural disasters, the city needs to address the lack of resources in communities like the ones I serve. It also needs to address the social and quality of life issues that prevent disfranchised communities from participating in programs such as Open Street. Thank you.
Thank you for that great presentation and lessons learned. This next presentation is from students from the Washington Heights Expeditionary Learning School. I've had the great pleasure to be working with them over the last year as these young leaders are imagining a future for their neighborhoods. So I'd like to introduce Elliot Hidalgo, Jen Martinez, and Noelia Martinez. Are you guys all set?
Yes, we're all set.
All right.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Elliot Hidalgo. I'm in the 11th grade, and I'm a corridor youth leader. I'm here today with my peers Noelia and Jen, and we will be presenting to you all about our environmental justice initiative in Washington Heights called the Clean Air Green Corridor, and how it relates to the ongoing conversation of equitable access to open and green spaces. 4 years ago, our school, the Washington Heights Expeditionary Learning School, and NYC Outward Bound School ran an all-week elective called Restoring Highbridge, where students learned about the history and importance of green space and the systemic barriers restricting green space in our neighborhood. 6 students were energized about this topic, and now with 200 more students, we have developed the Clean Air Green Corridor. With support from our nonprofit partner, Friends of Wheels, corridor youth leaders like myself are working to transform the built environment of 182nd Street into a hub for community-powered environmental and climate justice action that integrates arts and culture in Washington Heights. Through this initiative, corridor youth leaders are working to provide 100,000 plus people access to the Harlem River and otherwise off-limits area and Highbridge Park, our anchor park, while also connecting the dots between youth leadership, education, climate, and environmental justice. Our project focuses on the idea that we can help build a safe, clean, and healthy community by remaking 182nd Street. Our community of Washington Heights is mainly a low-income Latinx, immigrant, Spanish-speaking community where asthma, diabetes, and cancer rates are high. We are struggling to breathe. Clean air is an urgent issue in our neighborhood of Washington Heights. According to the Community Air Survey in 2016, our community was among the NYC neighborhoods with the poorest air quality. This is unsurprising, given that the George Washington Bridge, Henry Hudson Parkway, Harlem River Drive, and the I-95 all bring substantial car traffic through the neighborhood, as seen on the map. Corridor youth leaders have already begun to remake the street. We have been installing tree guards, cleaning up the Wheels Gardens, and studying traffic, air quality, and urban heat island in our neighborhood. Now I'll pass it on to Jen to speak about our plans for the summer.
Thank you, Elliot. I am Jen Martinez, a senior from WheEls that will soon be attending NYU. As mentioned, environmental injustice affects people of color the most, but incorporating green space into these areas helps reduce these burdens. There's a lot of research that focuses on the benefits of green space, but very little has been done centered around Washington Heights until recently. Throughout my senior year, I have been studying 175th Plaza, known as Plaza de las Americas. I conducted a survey of residents who reported that they are using this plaza on a frequent basis, as shown in the pie chart. In addition, many of the residents stated that their mental and physical health was improved through doing plaza activities, such as merengue dances, bands playing, and more activities. Our short-term goal is to close 182nd Street to cars and replicate the success of Plaza de las Americas. This street will strictly be used for the bettering lifestyle as seen on this slide. And during the summer, we will test the success of different activities. Here are some of the things we'd like to see happen in the space. Saturday dance parties, voter registration, places to hang out at and play cards. When the street is closed this summer, we can survey people about how it was used and if it improved their lifestyles. We can also see if the air quality has improved and if the urban heat island is reduced and if the closed street encourages more physical activities. Now, I would like to pass it on to my partner, Noelia, to talk about our long-term division.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noelia. It is my pleasure to be here today as I am a WheEls student. So today I will be discussing our long-term vision and what we currently are working on and what our goals are for the long term. So currently we are working on completing this application for the Open Streets program, which will be including a site plan and we will be figuring out the management of the streets. Community partners. We want to open the streets as best as we can without causing any troubles to people living in the area, like neighbors. So our youth leaders is now working with a group of partners on a community engagement plan in which we will seek the guidance of surrounding businesses and especially the schools around our streets. Why us and why now? Washington Heights is our home. We know how to make our community better when we work together. We are excited to be part of this because it can be a model for how youth leaders can imagine a better world where all communities have access to clean air and green space starting in our own communities. In the long term, by the time I graduate high school in 2023, we will have created a clean air green corridor from Broadway to Highbridge, from where students can walk to school safely and enjoy school activities outside. Along the clean air green corridor, there will be trees, green roofs, and green bus stops, and a stronger, healthier, greener community. Thank you again to Future Streets for allowing us and our group to be here and present our work that we have been working really hard on. It was truly our pleasure to be here today.
Thank you so much, Elliot, Jen, and Noelia, and great presentation. Now, our last presentation is Danny Harris, the Director of Transportation Alternatives. Danny, welcome. Oh, you're on mute. Can we unmute you?
Hi, everybody. Really such a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity. What I wanted to do is share with you a vision of what can come next for New York. And this is not Cybertrucks, this is not Hyperloops, this is not flying cars. This is a pretty simple model that just starts to reimagine what our streets look like. So what I'd like to do is just maybe start with a question. You're all in the comfort of your own home. I just want to sort of ask if you think this is normal. You can sort of put your hand up for yourself or whoever's around you. If you're on this call, I hope you can see that it's not. And as we talk about, obviously, our city getting back online, we just need to recognize how broken our streets and transportation and all of the incredible negative externalities that touch every part of the city and disproportionately impacts low-income and communities of color is. Right now, NREC's shows that New York City has the worst traffic in all of the nation. And this is before we're sort of fully reopened. So it's just important to let this sit in, that there's so many other important pieces of life that we want to come back to normal, for us to be able to do this in person, for us to get back to work. But the reality is that this was broken and we need to reimagine it. At Transportation Alternatives, we try to solve a pretty simple equation. It's obviously, has taken more than a century to get right, and we still haven't gotten it right. But it's space minus cars equals quality of life. In this equation, we know what is static, we know what is dynamic, and we know that even when we shift the amount of space that we devote to cars by a small amount, it creates exponential impacts for quality of life across the city, just as we've seen over the last year amid the tragedy of COVID. Just to take stock of how much space this city squanders on the movement and storage of vehicles, there are more than 19,000 lane miles devoted to the movement of vehicles and 3 million free parking spaces. So for those of you who drive or have driven or have heard no shortage of stories, there is 1.5 parking spaces for every one car registered in New York City. Meanwhile, for every 116 bicycles, there's only one place to park that bicycle. So this is a fundamental inequity, especially considering that only a minority of New York City households own a car. If we look at the full breakdown, right now, 75% of our streetscape is devoted to the movement and storage of vehicles. It is almost a rounding error as it relates to protected bike and bus lanes. And I should stress that, even as sidewalks are such a significant part of of New York City, not only are they too narrow, but they're increasingly covered with mountains of garbage and scaffolding. So to get around on our sidewalks, I have a stroller. It's incredibly challenging if you are somebody with limited abilities, if you're an older adult, if you're in a wheelchair. These are incredibly challenging issues that target the most vulnerable New Yorkers and make our city inaccessible for too many. And the costs are significant. So the cost of traffic violence alone to New York City's economy is over $4 billion a year. When you talk about opportunity costs and the lost number of hours and potential productivity, it's almost another $2 billion. So it's not just that we can't go back to normal, we can't afford to. In advancing this vision of New York City 25 by 25, where we're calling on mayoral candidates to repurpose 25% of our street space by 2025, we've been overwhelmed by the support. Since launching this coalition in March, we now have close to 180 coalition members. We have 6 mayoral candidates who have endorsed, including just recently, both Eric Adams and Andrew Yang signed on. And we've seen almost 10 cities around the country that are adopting this model of 25 by 25 to try to push not only their city, but their candidates to do the same. And it's important to talk about what this actually could look like. And I just want to stress here, especially for advocates who've been on the front line, we are so used to fighting for table scraps. Maybe we get a little bit here, a little bit there, but we can't think holistically. I just want to share with you, as we put out a hypothetical of all the things that we could get with this space, all of these are yes and. We could have a fully protected and connected bike network. We could have a fully, we could have a more protected bus network. We could have 1,000 lane miles of open streets. We could have daylighting at every intersection, which is where you remove the parking spot adjacent from the crosswalk, so it's both safer for pedestrians and cyclists, and cyclists and also drivers. That space can be turned to bike parking, to outdoor space, to micromobility hubs. We could have more pedestrian space. We could have car-free streets outside of every school in New York City. We could, if we monetized even a quarter of all of the free parking in New York, we could generate upwards of $1 billion. We could take trash off of our sidewalks. We could have dedicated delivery zones to get off of the double and triple parking we see all over the place. And just lastly, when we think about who this impacts, it impacts all New Yorkers, especially our most vulnerable. When we look at low-income commuters and knowing that commute time is one of the single biggest indicators of moving people out of generational poverty, it can transform the amount of time that you're stuck in traffic into time back and opportunity, especially for hardworking New Yorkers. We know that healthcare workers have the longest commute time in New York City. It was terrible before COVID. It's a tragedy now. Recognizing that there are over 1 million New Yorkers who have a disability, about half of whom have ambulatory disabilities, this can fundamentally reimagine not only how paratransit and access-ride move, but also access to the curb and to sidewalk space. About 1 in 10 New Yorkers have 1 in 10 New York children have asthma. Those rates are even higher in the Bronx. This can fundamentally reimagine our air and particulates, especially knowing that these levels, whether it's with stroke or heart disease, are higher among communities of color. This can transform what our city looks like. It can transform how we move. We know that the public supports it. We did some polling, found overwhelming support from New York City voters for these issues. And also importantly, especially as we're seeing traffic violence go up, 30% of New York City voters have been injured in a traffic crash. 70% know somebody injured or killed. Those numbers are higher if you're Black, in a household that makes under $50,000, over the age of 50. Staten Island residents, 48% of them have been injured in a traffic crash. So our question really is not just if we can afford to keep doing what we're doing, it's if we can afford not to. 25 by 25 is an incredibly bold challenge to think about the future of the city. We invite you to come join us. You can add your name to our coalition as an individual, business, community group. I'll put the information in the chat, and I look forward to the conversation. And the only path forward in New York City is on streets built for people, and we look forward to building it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danny. All right, so that was our 5 presentations, different lessons learned from Open Streets and what's next. And now we'd like to invite our panel to lead us through a discussion. So on the panel, we have Dr. Christian Braniam will moderate. Christian is one of the co-chairs of the New York panel on climate change and a fellow climate researcher. And we have Emily Weidenhoff, who's the director of public space at New York City Department of Transportation, where they've been doing amazing work for the last decade, transforming our streets into public spaces. And we have Eric Gregory, who is now the chief urban designer of the Department of City Planning. So thank you so much for leading this discussion. And Christian, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Thad. And, I'm really pleased to be here today. I serve as a co-director for a network at the Earth Institute called the Environmental Justice and Climate Just Cities Network. And so really pleased to contribute to today's event and take part in this robust conversation. So to start off with the panel, I'd really love to hear quickly, more about Eric and Emily's role in the Open Streets program. Eric is at the New York City Department of City Planning, as Thad mentioned. Emily is at the New York City Department of Transportation. Maybe we can start with Emily and then go to you, Eric. Can you tell us, Emily, more about how your role intersects with the Open Streets program? Can you tell us briefly?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, it was my amazing small but mighty team that helped roll out both open restaurants as well as open streets in response to the pandemic. It was really an incredibly encouraging time to see New Yorkers embrace our streets for people and for community in a way that, again, despite all the great work that's been happening, we really just saw an amazing uptick in how New Yorkers valued their streets and see this as a really critical moment to kind of continue this momentum. And I think just to flag maybe 2 kind of primary frequencies that we hit with these programs that we feel are really kind of galvanizing our past work and accelerating it and evolving it into the future. I think Open Restaurants has shown us that business and public open space is not mutually exclusive, that we can actually leverage and benefit benefit and support our businesses while also supporting vibrant open space. And it's really just about working with communities and getting the balance right between the two. And with our Open Streets program, more than ever, we have this software layer that allows us to manage our streets in a kind of on-demand way, more precisely for pedestrians and cyclists when we need it. And we think this is, it has shown us so much, in our collaboration with Jim and his team to show that managing these streets in a residential along a residential corridor is just as valuable as past weekend walk and seasonal street programs have done on commercial districts, to also being able to provide a tool that allows us to engage with communities in a meaningful way, to start something, to start to create safer streets. And we're very excited that will then allow us to continue to design and grow at a corridor and district-wide scale, safer and more inclusive street designs with communities moving forward.
Wow, thank you, Emily. Yeah, I mean, I should have said earlier that what a Herculean effort to get this rolling so quickly last year. As others have mentioned, really applaud you and your staff. Eric, can you tell us more about your role in Open Streets?
Yeah, thank you, Christian, and thank you for all the wonderful partners and presentations that have shared some wonderful projects that are already happening and pushing us, both Emily and I and the city as a whole, to kind of dream bigger. So thank you for that. So I'm happy to be here to represent urban design on behalf of the Department of City Planning. Our aim is to shape a more livable city by advocating for high quality design of the built environment. And we want to do this by contributing to the quality of life and well-being for all New Yorkers in every neighborhood. And I think it's we've always kind of worked from the mantra of the experience that people have when they walk down the street and move through their city. And so it's really great to see the variety of ways that folks have used both the Open Restaurants program and Open Streets programs. As for our role, I think there was a lot of different agencies that were involved in the effort. We were very much focused on the Open Restaurants, although I will say that as urban designers, we working at city planning, we really try to champion this holistic view of the public realm, which is not just looking solely at just our streets and sidewalks and open spaces, but also the buildings that speak, interact, and frame those spaces. And so I think all of these together are really important when we start thinking about the future of our streets that we want to see. A lot of the sidewalk cafe regulations that kind of existed pre-pandemic before Open Restaurants. Some of you might have been able to visit them, although their numbers were few. And today we're with the Open Restaurants, we're looking at the neighborhood of like 10,000 restaurants have been able to use the program. And I think picking up on some of the things that Jim was speaking to earlier, it's really about being flexible and finding ways to simplify things and have us kind of get out of the way. And so I think a lot of the effort really was through many meetings across a host of different agencies to look at the rules that are governing how these spaces are used and how can we simplify or kind of in this emergency order kind of turn off some of those things so that we can really make sure our streets were remaining safe, but also bringing back some vitality and vibrancy that certainly was missing. I think all of us were yearning for. And so I think it's been really amazing to see the work that's unfolded by New Yorkers, by community groups, to kind of activate these streets, and by business owners to kind of work through a lot of the guidance and enforcement issues that clearly are challenges moving forward, but to create spaces that really helped keep them in business, but also bring nourishment and livelihood to New Yorkers.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation now because you guys have kind of set up some great questions, and I've been monitoring the chat a little bit to see what questions are there. Just to start, you both have talked about different benefits of open streets. One question I have for you is, how can folks better understand what those benefits are more broadly? Open streets, in some ways, is similar to other programs that have happened internationally. So, for example, abroad in Barcelona, Spain, a super block initiative was created where traffic was limited in groups of blocks, and there was a lot of opposition in the beginning And then later, residents actually embraced that program. So do you have thoughts about how we can amplify or modify the messaging so that folks understand the benefits of the Open Streets program? And either of you wants to respond?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say, just jump in first and then Eric, please. Something that has been hugely valuable is having our limited local access open street. Again, it's allowed for neighborhoods to fine tune and manage their streets. If they want to be able to still pick up and drop off on a block, if they still want to be able to park on a block, they can, but they can do it in a way that's much more safe, that's much less vehicles than normally traveling the corridor. And it, like we've seen with all of our programs, starting to change the street leads to much more, little baby steps in the beginning can lead to much more dramatic steps in the future. So I think, working across a lot more geography with some of these baby steps will really accelerate a lot of moves as we start to see kind of increased successes citywide. And I think, the other kind of the big piece for us is we're finally at a moment with a permanent program and funding and kind of a city transitioning to recovery. We're finally at a moment where we can start to plan an actual program. Up until a short time ago, we were really in this response mode. And so of course, there are going to be a lot of floundering, a lot of communication issues, a lot of management issues during a crisis. So we're very, very excited to, again, make this shift into a permanent program and focus on messaging and outreach to really make sure that folks who, again, may not have had access to these tools, but may start to see them in, in other parts of the city can begin to really learn more. So I think there's a lot about, communication and outreach, and that is still kind of, we're just at the beginning of, and really hope to do a lot more of that in the coming months to make sure that folks realize what opportunities they are and how we can kind of right size programs to meet the various challenges in different neighborhoods.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I wonder, oh, go ahead, Eric, please.
No, please.
Oh, no, go ahead. Thank you.
I was just, I think a lot of the, Emily was kind of mentioning that just the expansion of the programs as a whole has been the biggest, I would say, visible component of these things. Before we had, I think, less than 900 sidewalk cafes in the city that were permitted, and that was a very onerous process. You had to get licensed architects and engineers to stamp your drawings. You had to pay a fair amount of fees to have that space. And like within zoning code, which city planning is the steward of, you had restrictions on where you could even have them. And so I think just by the sheer volume and the ability to kind of loosen that throughout the city has been the biggest visible component of the importance of these things and how great they can be. Certainly that's going to represent new challenges for us that we'll have to think through. And making sure that quality of life is still there for New Yorkers. But I would say that you don't have to look much further than a lot of folks on this call for how we get the word out on these things, and that's through Neighborhoods Now, which was really great, and pulling together design professionals and partners that could kind of be on the ground and working directly with businesses and residences to unpack some of these regulations and guidelines of the temporary program was key. Certainly folks that are such as Jim and Leslie, where they're bringing programming to those spaces. So I think those are the the biggest folks that can help spread the word of this. Now, on the city side, certainly, we have tools like our websites and social media and how we're mapping things to bring awareness so that people can see where a sidewalk cafe is in the city, and perhaps they need to, be informed through that means. I think we, from an urban design perspective, have always tried to use visualization to really draw out the complexities of regulations. And so how can we, use the right words and kind of not speak too much in jargon, so that we can make sure that like the way we're communicating is also accessible. And I think finding ways to get out there and speak with folks outside of a particular initiative, just to kind of, always be checking on the pulse of neighborhoods is important. It's very challenging for us. We're a very small team, but I the ideas of having like the field office that the Jackson Heights group did is great, where you're able to really get on the ground and get out there. So I just, I guess in short, your communication and getting the word out there has to be, tapped across all mediums and resources.
Yeah, and for me, as a researcher, I've been following the air quality improvements that have happened in the Northeast since COVID started. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to communicate the potential air quality benefits that come with open streets. Some folks have mentioned reduced traffic crashes, reduced incidents where vehicles and pedestrians are colliding. So obviously there's some effort involved in tracking those things, but maybe that's another way to communicate the benefits. On the flip side, folks may be upset about changes in traffic patterns, or changes in parking in a city with very limited parking. How are you guys thinking about the flip side, where obviously there have been some clear benefits, and we haven't quantitatively measured them. However, we anticipate there have been some real benefits around air quality, and things like traffic crashes, which have been measured to some extent. How do you address the flip side of concerns about traffic and parking? How can we take those concerns into account as well?
Yeah, I think for sure we are behind in kind of communicating the wider range of benefits of these types of programs, particularly when it comes to air quality. So I think there's a tremendous amount of potential to weave air quality, heat vulnerability index, a lot of these other really critical indicators, health indicators, quality of life indicators into this work for sure. And that's something, again, there are a lot of other cities that have done this really well, and so there's a lot to learn from and ramp that up. I think it's definitely something we're interested in, and again, we're excited this year with a little more resources and a little more capacity to start to be able to do more observations, more inspections, really be able to quantify and qualify how a lot of these spaces are functioning. So again, very, very excited, to move that piece forward. Eric, do you want to?
I mean, I don't know if there's any perfect answer here, because it is challenging. We're in one of the densest cities on the planet, and certainly having to make sure that we take into account a wide range of voices whenever we do things from a regulation standpoint is very important. Understanding, the communities that we're working in, a lot of these projects shared today are in low income neighborhoods that have, had years and years and years of disinvestment. And so, really understanding what's happening in those locations is extremely key, so that we can begin to, right a lot of the wrongs that have happened there, you know, from decades of kind of poor planning practices. So, you know, I think what's you know, love it or dislike it, you know, the public process of public review and you know, going through the political discourse of trying to get these changes to happen, and really seeking inputs of community boards, of community groups is, you know, just something that we're going to have to do as we try to make this program permanent, which Emily alluded to, which is what we're beginning to embark on now. But what's great is that like we've been getting a lot of feedback. And I mean, could any of you imagined, like, you know, a year ago that we would have had this, you know, these amazing streets to talk about? And like, just it's amazing like how quickly the dialogue has changed, and, you know, through groups like the Transportation Alternatives to put forward these really actually quite simple ideas of changing our streets. And so, yeah, you know, with any change, you know, has its challenges. You know, it can, you know, impact, you know, someone's day-to-day life. But I think those are the things we just have to find ways of working through.
Yeah, you know, it's tough, right? When you make policies, a lot of times there's opposition of policies initially because of fears of what could happen. You survey people years later, and they feel differently about those policies. So we recognize the challenges you guys are facing, and yet I think you know, most folks, the vast majority of folks, are really excited about open streets. You know, I wonder if there's a role for students in supporting this. You know, college students at institutions that, you know, we're affiliated with, myself, Barnard College and Columbia University. You mentioned the designs and drawings for the corner cafes. Maybe architecture students, urban design students can support restaurants with that. Maybe student volunteers can help with managing the streets. You know, obviously we may have to train them a bit for that, and make sure they have, you know, cultural humility as well as cultural competency. But maybe there's a way for students to support. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Thad Pulowski. You know, you just touched on something that I wanted to discuss, and that's equity. You know, you mentioned that your work, Eric, is focused on every community, every neighborhood, you know, and yet much of the discussion in recent years has been around equity as opposed to equality. And so there seems to be an opportunity to prioritize disinvested communities, and make sure that there's equity and ability for folks to advocate for open streets. You know, how could the process be less challenging and more equitable? Is there a way to make it easier for folks to set up their open streets? Have you thought about ways to integrate equity into the process of approval for open streets? Any thoughts on that, Eric and Emily? And I guess I'll start with Eric this time, because you kind of touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, I think Emily will be able to speak more directly to the process for open streets as a, you know, Department of Transportation initiative. But just to kind of echo some of your thoughts earlier about tapping into youth and students, and I think it's wonderful to see the work that Elliot, Jen, and Noella shared earlier today. Really great, and I think we've been looking for opportunities to engage with youth in similar fronts. You know, we're a small division, but certainly want to bring more voices, not just into this conversation, but into the broader planning and urban design fields, which we hope will become much more diverse and be reflective of the communities of our city. So just hats off to them for being part of that wonderful initiative. You know, I guess when we look at sidewalk cafes as they exist now and open restaurants, which is where city planning has been much more, I guess, a part of, you know, I think we can begin to be more equitable by, you know, limiting, getting rid of the geography restrictions. So, you know, before they were only in maybe certain parts of the city, maybe more affluent, or where you would have a nexus of restaurants or commercial activity, and really thinking about how we can broaden that more widely. And I think, thinking through what are the barriers to getting into those programs from a cost perspective. Certainly, there's a bit of an honor system that takes place, and making sure that our sidewalks are accessible for folks to move on the sidewalks. And we have to be mindful of private use of our public streets. So certainly we want to be able to let folks tap into that space, but we also need to make sure that it's a just like parked cars are taking up 3 million spaces. We also need to make sure that there's room for people to get where they need to go. So just I think there's a lot of things that happen between buildings, and having to kind of think through all of them is definitely very challenging. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but and certainly Emily might have thoughts on the Open Streets program.
Yeah, totally. I think, one baseline is just engaging more people and having a broader conversation in communities, for sure. Again, there are a lot of neighborhoods that, have resources, and the resources are not just money, but they're, connections and time and connections to different aspects of the community that are just fostered in such a sophisticated way that just kind of jumpstart, moments like this when there are these opportunities to take on management and design of streets, and so building that capacity elsewhere in the city, and again, oftentimes, in neighborhoods that need it most is a really vital component to all of this. Specifically around Open Streets, as Eric mentioned, we've just seen a fantastic increase in geography for the first time in a long time with a lot of our public space programs, because ultimately the kind of requirements to manage and maintain these things were so light touch. That's really important to us, and a layer of the program we're really looking to preserve and think about how we can really kind of layer different uses, layer management with programming in a way that kind of allows and leverages a larger set of resources. We also feel very strongly that Open Streets moving forward to be successful and equitable needs to have a city managed component. And so that will be something we're working towards this year, to take some of these new resources and have DOT be able to provide a lot of the management and what it takes to keep these things running, as well as being able to layer management. And so we've for many years in collaboration with the Horticulture Society of New York and ACE New York have run our Plaza Equity program, where we pair kind of needs, public space needs in communities with really great workforce development programs. And that has been such a kind of successful equation for kind of creating greater solutions out of a series of challenges, and by really pairing them and locally addressing public space and community investment. And that's something we're definitely excited to take further through Open Streets and develop that even more. So that will be a huge component of how we look to move forward with the program in an equitable way.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Emily. I was thinking about the Pedestrian Plaza initiative and before today, and I've heard a lot of discussion today about having a more connected network of open streets. And you both have talked about equity, and what comes up sometimes in New York is that access to safe bike lanes may not be distributed equitably, and also the need to transition the city away from fossil fuel using single-use vehicles. And so perhaps there's an opportunity for this connected network of open streets where folks can bike. Maybe it's complemented by dedicated streets for buses. But I'm curious, do you see an opportunity in the future for a connected network? Maybe it's linked with pedestrian plazas so that folks can get around the city without using vehicles. Could this complement the city's goals around reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Definitely. We're thinking so much about this at DOT, obviously, and have so many tools, again, more tools than ever, we feel like. And I would encourage folks to take a look, if you haven't seen already, to take a look at some of the work that we're doing along Broadway this year, taking our kind of gradient of roadway design tools and delivering an overall better connected network that ultimately remains flexible. And so it will be able to kind of be resilient as mode shifts change, should congestion pricing move forward, kind of dramatic shifts in the transportation network, really making sure that ultimately our streets continue to help people move, but ultimately at a higher quality of life for sure. And I definitely, again, I think challenges of equity are very at the forefront of these larger transportation network moves, and are ultimately going to be the challenge. Again, love a kind of large, big picture goal, and certainly when you look at the car ownership numbers and the miles of streets and the amazing real estate we have available, kind of from far away, it's absolutely achievable. The challenge is to really where are going to be kind of the biggest kind of cost benefit, and how do we make really meaningful change on the ground to serve the communities that need it most, as well as making the kind of the biggest mode shifts that will get us to where we want to be. I think that's definitely a huge part of the challenge moving forward.
Yeah, indeed, and some of those mode shifts, could really amplify tourism. If we expand the open restaurants program at the same time, we create this connected network. Maybe that helps bring folks to certain restaurants. Maybe it helps street vendors as well that set up along those connected networks. So that sounds really exciting. So at this stage, I want to transition to including some of the questions from the Q&A. That I know you've shared some questions with me, so I'll kind of try to do my best to read these questions and kind of summarize them, and so that we kind of have that interaction with the attendees. So one question that's come in. Oh, go ahead, Thad. Did you want to? Or will you handle the question?
I was just going to say, yeah, sure. Actually, because there are so many questions and really good questions in the Q&A, and this dialogue box in itself has become like a really great forum for discussion. So I'd encourage everyone, first of all, to open that up and take a look. And a lot of the questions are directed at the presenters. So we thought we have a little bit of time. We did really good on timing. So we thought we would go around to the presenters who have been monitoring the Q&A and have them give a key lesson learned or a clear next step that they've taken away from the conversation today. It's been great to hear from Eric and Emily and to hear the city, but also what's kind of amazing about this whole moment is that so much of the future of our streets seems to suddenly be in the hands of its citizens. So we thought we'd just go back around and hear from the same order. Start with Leslie from Street Lab and invite you to give a closing thought for us, Leslie.
Yeah, thanks, Thad. It sort of relates to one question that I saw pop up. Somebody said, seems like these are all great pilot projects. Maybe we're still in the pilot phases. What's a bigger vision? And I thought that was an interesting question, because I think one thing that I take away from all this is the capacity to change. You know, everybody turned on a dime this year, right? From the government agencies to the communities themselves and residents. And that's what we need to get better at, because you know, we can say we can start planning for the permanent things, but it's not going to, nothing's going to be permanent going forward. You know, there's going to be more things that disrupt and change. So even putting in permanent, you know, building permanent features in public spaces can be problematic when you have flooding and you have migration of people, and you know, that's our future. So I just love, you know, if we can think more about the systems and the ways that people were able to change, and the roadblocks to communication and things like that, and build a better capacity to change, is maybe what I'm thinking should be the focus.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jim, closing thoughts, takeaways?
Yeah, I think that I consider this definitely permanent, and I would like to see some more infrastructure put in immediately from DOT, and not wait for the design and build, so that it just takes the intense labor that we have to do every single morning, every single evening. It's an awful lot of work. We've been doing it for well over a year now, and coordinating out of 150 volunteers, 40 volunteers to open and close every day, plus our programming folks, is a lot of work that can be, the barricade volunteers can be reduced significantly if there's some great infrastructure in place. And so I'm really hoping that DOT comes up and wows us with some amazing things, because I'd love to have more of those volunteers to help us with other things. And think they're a great partner, and we just would love to for them to take some of the burden off our volunteers. Thank you.
And can we hear from the Neighborhoods Now group, Leslie?
Sure. You know, this was a very difficult year to be running a bid in an underprivileged neighborhood with non-English speakers. And I think that, you know, the lesson to take is that when we are trying to help our community, we need to start by solving those pre-existing conditions, inequalities that were there. They were not new to our many city partners. We have been talking about them, and then they just became an obstacle to help our small businesses and to reach them. I was very, very, very lucky to be picked for the Neighborhood Now program, because that gave the community free, and it gave manpower to help many of the businesses that otherwise probably wouldn't have closed by now. And that's what I need to give credit to DOT. I talk about the city a lot, but they stood out as a partner during this time. Of all the city agencies, they're the ones who will work with us to modify rules, to listen to our issues, to try to adapt. I know that we didn't get there every single time, but I think the city should be looking to DOT to figure out how to better partner with people on the ground, to listen and to implement programs that help the small businesses and just commercial districts in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Next, we'd love to hear from the Wheel students. Noelia Martinez, will you
Yes,
tell us what your
hi.
takeaway is?
Yeah, I would say one of my biggest takeaways is probably like when we do have this application filled out for the DOT, I do hope we get great infrastructure. I hope that we get infrastructure that is not only going to help the students, but also the street vendors on the streets, because I think that's what this is mostly about. We're working to help the community more than ourselves. So I really hope we get to do that. And I really like this whole presentation, I learned that programming is really key. And I think with programming, we can get a lot more people on the streets.
That's great. Thank you, Noelia. Great job presenting today. And finally, Danny. All right, Danny from Transportation Alternatives.
Hi, can you hear me? It's not letting me turn my video off. So, hi. Okay.
Okay.
Great. I'm here.
Yeah, good.
Hi. Yeah. So I think that in addition to the great conversation and the ideas, I think a huge part that we all need to recognize is really about imagination, especially of residents, about thinking and expecting and demanding something better on their streetscape. And I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when they draw a picture of the sky, they draw clouds in the sun. And then when they draw a picture of a city, they draw cars everywhere. So I think we also need to acknowledge that this is a hearts and minds campaign for all of us as we help New Yorkers, 8.6 million of them, think about and demand better outcomes from this incredible asset that we have, which is asphalt. And so, we need to stop moving from community board to community board to fight for a safer intersection or an open street or a protected bike lane or bus lane, and show New Yorkers that, we, just as we wouldn't build a quarter of a bridge, we wouldn't do the same with these other critical pieces of infrastructure, whether they're, protected bike and bus lanes or safer intersections. So there is no path forward for New York that's built on vehicles. It's failed us for the last 100 years. It will do so for the next 100 years. And it doesn't matter if those cars are electric, autonomous, or flying. They still take up a significant amount of space and leave too many New Yorkers behind. So, we're incredibly, hopeful about a future of the city, and incredibly grateful to do with the partners on this call and those who are joining. And again, we urge you to get in the fight with us, because, it's great to talk about these things. It's another to actually get in, as so many on this call, and Jim, especially, I'm looking at you with the incredible work you've done on 34th Ave to make this a reality. Be a beacon for not only all open streets, but really sort of a permanent model for what the city can do moving forward. So just very grateful to be here on the call with you. Thank you.
In the last few minutes, it would be great to just hear closing thoughts from both of our panelists. And then if the other host organizations want to say anything to close us out, that'd be great too. So Emily and Eric.
Yeah, I will just say, to echo what everyone has said, now more than ever, our streets are being stewarded by all of you. And I think that's so important. People don't think twice about decorating a park or a playground for a birthday party or getting together and having a reunion. And I think, the same should be for our streets and for building your neighborhood on your streets. And I think that is what so much both, restaurants have showed us, that personal level of care, as well as all of our open street stewards thus far. And so I do think that's a huge kind of spirit of this past year that I personally am very excited to work with everyone to continue to move that forward.
Yeah. Also just echo, everything that all the partners have said on the call. And I think, speaking on behalf of urban designers at City Planning, we're eager to work with you to the extent that we're able to. So I definitely want to be, I think we want to be right in the middle of this conversation with you and others to rethink our streets. And it's such an important time as we not only decide who our next mayor is, but also city council members. I mean, there's a vast amount of change that's going to happen with our elected officials. And, this is certainly a very important topic that it's going to be exciting to be inside government and see how we can hopefully respond to the creative ideas and on the ground work that each of you is putting out there. And just lastly, I do want to give a shout out to my local open street that's run by a group called Marcus Meets Malcolm on 120th Street here in Harlem. So much the way that Jim and 34th Street have led the way, I would say that group also has been really amazing and bringing like such wonderful programming to that street that I love walking down with my 3-year-old daughter. So props to them if any of them are listening.
Okay, and then finally, maybe we'll just turn it back to hear a closing thought from our hosts, starting with Catherine at the Urban Design Forum.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We are so grateful to be here in conversation with all of you today. I'll just say on behalf of the Urban Design Forum and Van Allen Institute, we are continuing our work through the Neighborhoods Now program, and we'll be hosting further public programming to reflect on what we've been learning throughout the process in the spring and the summer. So keep an eye out on our websites for more information about that, and looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Great. I'll just echo what Catherine said. We're really excited by all the work that was shared today, and really excited just through our program and all the efforts that we see now to see the future of Open Streets really unfold, and hopefully get to a place where we land in a more equitable future. But yeah, so it's, again, to echo Catherine's sentiments, we're doing a lot of work just showcasing the program and a lot of great stuff that came out of it over the next couple of months. So please stay tuned for our organizations to get more information on that. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for participating. This has been another great Zoom event, but I'm looking so much forward to seeing everybody out in the streets this summer. And yeah, let's just enjoy this great city that we share and come together in the public realm. Thanks so much for joining today, and looking forward to future conversations.